Hello and welcome back to another special episode of the Viva Film podcast. Today I'm joined by my co-host Caleb. Caleb, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you. So this week we are starting a brand new series on wrestling movies. We have a couple films about wrestling, and then we have a couple documentaries that we're also going to be watching. Do you care to like kind of introduce? Because I know we're talking about The Wrestler and then Iron Claw, and then we're talking about two documentaries. I believe one of them is Tale of the Mat, correct?
Beyond the Mat.
Beyond the Mat. Okay. And what was the other one that we're talking about?
It's called Wrestling with Shadows, but the full title is Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows.
Okay. And like, what are these? So these wrestling is something that's been like really important to you your whole life, correct? Like this is something you followed for a while. What is it about wrestling that has really like captivated you and has kept you a fan for so long?
Well, I think the thing about wrestling that appeals to me specifically is, and I think with a lot of people is I really enjoy, the storytelling that it's capable of. And when I say that, there's a lot of debate between wrestling fans about, oh, do you prefer in-ring action or storytelling? It's like a spoiler alert, it's the same thing. Like,
Sure.
so like for me, like with wrestling, what it's able to accomplish is it's able to tell a very specific type of story, because it often gets called, the way people describe wrestling is sometimes people go, it's just a TV show. It's like Game of Thrones. A really bad person once made a long YouTube movie thing all about how it's actually just a TV show, you guys. But then, and I think that's not insincere, but I don't think that's correct. And then sometimes people will go, oh, it's like ballet with body slams. I also don't think that's accurate, even though ballet is very physical and very difficult to do well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people also say it's a soap opera for men, super condescending, um, and also inaccurate. Is like, and don't get me wrong, I think that WWE has kind of ever since they killed WCW, it's kind of changed how people view wrestling. So they view it as like, oh, it's like a soap opera where like, people are stealing each other's wives and, and there's all sorts of swerves and like, oh, this person's friends with this person, not friends with that person. And that is an element of wrestling. But ultimately, the thing about wrestling that I really enjoy is I like being entertained by like good in-ring action, and explaining what that means to someone who doesn't watch wrestling can be a little bit difficult. But what I'll say is it's kind of like watching like a really good, like, sports game. Like if you're watching football, there's a difference between like a bad football game and a good football game. And same with wrestling. There's a difference between a good match and a bad match. And the thing is, I think if you can have two or three or four multiple performers who are able to get a crowd invested in what they're doing, then that's what makes a good wrestling match. And then when you add like character into it, like people who have different unique perspectives or different traits to their characters, or people who are like have weird quirks that can then make their matches more unique. And then when you put two people together, it makes things different. So you have a very serious wrestler versus a very funny wrestler. When you bring that together, that's super entertaining. Just like it is in like comic books, where you're going to get a very different story if you put like Batman and Booster Gold together than if you put like Batman and the Question together.
Sure, yeah.
So
And there has for a long time been a lot of crossover between like wrestling fans and comic book fans.
oh yeah.
Do you think that like wrestling is kind of like a, like if you were to bring comic books into the real world, would wrestling be like the closest kind of closest kind of comparison?
No, 100%, yeah.
Okay.
And I want to clarify, it's not even it's more just because of how, and maybe this is more for like the 80s, because the 80s was a lot more brighter, I would say, where everyone was wearing like super bright clothing and was like on steroids, so they looked massive. And then as we progress, we realize, oh, maybe they shouldn't all be on steroids and hitting each other as hard as they can in the head. But I do think it is very similar, because again, you have these very unique characters who are, who have like motivation and are, you can tell really interesting stories with wrestling that I don't think you can tell in like any other medium.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've even tried comparing it to like, I've thought this before. Is like, could you like translate that to like a boxing movie or something like that. And then even like going backwards, I've thought about before, like watching like the Creed movies or Rocky, like could you translate this exact story to wrestling? And I think it would be difficult to do that exact same thing. But like for example, like I think a thing with wrestling is that even if you can make a character or a performer really interesting just by losing. And that's the thing that gets lost on people, because once people get too into wrestling, I think sometimes they get too obsessed with like, oh, who's winning and losing, and they're losing sight of how to tell interesting stories and how to give characters like proper motivation. And also, but you also want to balance that with good in-ring action. you know like a lot of times with WWE, for example, they kind of prioritize like you know how, especially recently, it's not necessarily about how good of a wrestler you are, it's more how marketable are you, especially under like TKO. How much do so it's like that's what's made me kind of stray from WWE as much, whereas like with AEW, which is another big company, which is the second biggest in America right now, people get very upset when you say that, but it's more about telling stories, telling unique stories, having good characters, but also letting them perform to the best of their ability and actually put on like entertaining matches that the crowd is into. Because the worst reaction you can have in wrestling is the crowd not caring at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like genuinely, or the crowd just rejecting what's happening, which has happened a few times. Very famously with TNA, once Hulk Hogan took over in TNA, one of their wrestlers who was there for a very long time, Christopher Daniels, they had him lose to Val Venus, who was an awful person, terrible wrestler that they brought in just because he was in WWE one time. And then it was just like, and the fans literally like stood up and like turned around and like put their backs to it, because they were just like, and that's not the reaction you want.
Right.
And another thing is, a lot of fans and wrestling promoters will defend people not liking something as good heat. There is a difference between fans booing in a way where they're like, oh my god, this person's being dastardly, and I fucking hate this. And the difference between that is Logan Paul, who sucks and no one likes, and Dominic Mysterio, who everyone is like, oh, he's doing a very good job at what he's doing. We like that he's a villain.
Right. Okay. And how do the films that you chose for this series, how do they kind of like, kind of encapsulate how you feel about wrestling, and how do they represent wrestling for you?
That's a really good question. I would say, I think that the wrestler, it represents. What's also interesting because the wrestler is like fully, like, there are real wrestlers in the movie,
mm-hmm.
but it's mostly fictional. Like, or it's a fictional, but it also is true to what wrestling is. It's about how if you get to a certain age, no matter how big you were, and you're not in that WWE system, like once you're considered too old and you're working the indies, life can be really tough, and it can kind of, break you down a little bit. And I think that's something that's very true for a lot of older wrestlers, that they realize whenever they've spent a lot of their money, whenever they were on top, and then they find, oh wait, my entire career is based around my body and I'm almost 60 years old.
Yeah.
And that gets difficult. So I think the wrestler's very true to that. There's a lot of different wrestlers that I feel like kind of combine into creating Mickey Rourke's character, which we'll get into in the actual review for that. The Iron Claw is a true story. And that movie encapsulates first of all, it tells a really tragic story about the Von Erich family, who are like one of the biggest and most important families in the history of wrestling, especially outside of the WWE.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it shows and discusses wrestling in a way that, like, you understand the negative aspects of it and how it can play into, like, for example, toxic masculinity with like Fritz Von Erich and how he views it. But it also does show unity, because like, and how it can unify people, because even though the brothers do compete against each other, they loved each other. And I think wrestling brought them together in a way where they were able to, even though they were kind of like shoved into it, were able to take that and create art with it. Mm-hmm. Which I really think works really well with that movie. And then with what we talk about when we talk about Beyond the Mat, Beyond the Mat is the last time that Vince McMahon ever let somebody outside of WWE come and make a movie inside, basically.
Yeah.
Where because WWE produced documentaries are bad, and they tell the story they want to tell. And I don't want this video to go on too long, so I'm going to try to wrap up this question really quickly. But with Beyond the Mat, it very much is about how strenuous it can be behind the scenes, how it can affect your personal life. It actually shares a lot in common with The Wrestler, specifically with one person in particular,
Mm-hmm.
who we'll be talking about. But I think Beyond the Mat, and it also does tell about how, you know, people can kind of take advantage of each other in the wrestling ring in bad ways, and it'll make someone who you might like look kind of bad, you know. And then with Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows, that's about Bret Hart's last year in the WWF, before he left under very bad circumstances, which you'll understand better once you watch it, because I know you haven't seen it yet. But basically, it is just a really sad look behind the scenes of, you know, the biggest wrestling company, and how Vince McMahon is not a very good person and doesn't know how to run things, and kind of became successful on accident.
Right.
I think that's the thesis statement of that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And I mean, what do you have to say to people who don't know shit about wrestling? Someone like myself, as a way to like, hey, this is why you should give wrestling a chance. This is why you should, you know, give it a shot.
I would say the reason to watch wrestling is because you get the opportunity to see two, you know, or multiple people. And let's just say it in its most simplest terms.
Mm-hmm.
You get to see two people have an athletic, scripted contest where at its best, they can make you care, they can make you excited, they can make you nervous. And it makes you like feel something. Like, wrestling is such a difficult thing to like actually verbalize for somebody who hasn't seen it, because it's one of those things where, honestly, I think that once you watch it for the first time, if you don't immediately understand it, or get it, I don't necessarily know if you'll be fully convinced. But it's one of those where if you watch it and you just like, you buy into what's happening, especially with a good match, like watch something really good. So I'll say to everyone at home, watch I almost said Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA. That is a good one, but maybe not that. That may be a little bit older. But, you know, a really recent one, actually, from AAA, it is in WWE, but I would say is the original El Grande Americano versus El Grande Americano, Mask versus Mask. That match pretty much sums up what wrestling is. It's about 40 minutes long. It's really good. And there is history to it. Like, there is context you'll be missing. But that's one thing people forget with wrestling is you can get the context is there. You're like, okay, I get that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to have everything spoon fed to you. You know, like, you know, we're all adults here. It's fine. Like, you know, you can pick up context. It's okay. And the thing with wrestling is it's also like comic books. If you just jump into it. Don't worry about where to start. Like, just jump into it. You're gonna be confused no matter what. So
Yeah, and kind of like using the comic book, you know, comparison. And again, just, you know, who's your favorite character? Just buy whatever their most recent book is.
Exactly.
You know, and just jump into it. And if you have any questions, just look it up.
Yeah.
Google it. You know.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
it's and also, as a side note, it's something that's so ridiculous is when people get released from WWE, or AEW, and it's like really sad. I don't think that's a good thing when WWE releases people.
Mhm.
But like, a lot of fans, it's like, you know, you are allowed to still support and follow them where they go next. Like, there's more than just WWE out there, and that is the most important thing I will say. Because if I only watched WWE, I would not have my precious, wonderful favorites, the Knockout Brothers in New Japan Pro Wrestling, who I love with all my heart.
Hell yeah, New Japan Pro Wrestling. I know you've mentioned them a few times on the pod.
Yeah.
So yeah, go check out New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you want to hear us talk more about wrestling, we will be having 2 episodes coming up very soon about wrestling. The Wrestler and the Iron Claw will be our first one, and then we'll have Beyond the Mat and Wrestling with Shadows coming up. So make sure you subscribe and make sure you stick around and see what we have to say about these films.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. All right, we'll see you next time, folks.